Hi, this is a tutorial on using layer masks in Adobe Photoshop CC. I have not used a lot of layer masks in the past, and I was determined that this is the time to learn how to use it. And so I created this little piece of artwork using some composite photographs and other layers, and I'll show you how this is all composed, and then we'll build the thing back up again using the assets we have in the class. So here it goes. I have a typography layer on the very top. And this tutorial is very much going to be about how you use the layers, layer masks, and blending modes to put these pieces together. To make the typography a little easier to read, I also put in a little faded, gradiated black gradient from foreground to transparent. I put in a computer circuit board from some stock clip art. I put in a vignette, and as you can see, things get more and more apparent. And then to populate my class, I used actually 6 photos of the same student over and over again in different locations, and used layer masks to pop them into place one at a time. And I'll show you how I did that in a sec too. So I'm going to close this and start it all over again by going to the files and show you how things were set up. Starts with the 6 pictures, and as I put these pictures in place, I'm going to try to put the rearmost picture first. That is, the picture with the student in the very back is going to go in there first. And I'm going to build the rest of the pictures as layers on top of it, and then use layer masks to hide certain parts, certain pixels, so it lets the students pop through. Now, in taking these series of pictures, to make them all match up really, really well, I put the camera on a tripod, locked down its location so that the images would match up, and then I locked the focus and exposure so they'd all be roughly the same, and the results worked out really well. It's much simpler to work this way if you can lock down your camera first. To put the rest of these pictures on, I'm going to select all of them by clicking the first one, holding Shift, and hitting the last one. 110 is already in place. When I drag them into place in Photoshop CC, it's kind of nice that it automatically sizes the thing and puts them in sequence one at a time. I just sort of place it like this, it floats, I double click it, it locks it in place and brings up the next one to put in to the next layer, and all the subsequent layers come in really quickly like this. So moving it into place, double clicking, and now I have all 6 layers represented. Now the next thing to make this work a little bit better, after trial and error, I realized it works best to have the foreground subject at the top of the stack. So there's my foreground subjects. And this was the order that I took the picture in, with the student in the first row, and then I had the student in the second row, and then I had the student in the third row. So I'm putting them in that order: 05, 06, 07, 08, 09 in sequence. So the foreground students would normally cover over the background students. Now we're ready to start applying layer masks and trying to get rid of things, try to get rid of elements. And what we want to do here is, in the top layer, I want to make the student in the foreground opaque, and I want to make everything around him invisible, so it creates a window to show through and see the next student. And then I'll repeat that process with the next student or the next layer, and so on until I get everything built. And here's the tools that I'm going to use to do that. The Quick Select tool, third or fourth from the top in the toolbar, works pretty well. Now I'm going to give you the shortcuts that I use as I go through this. For Quick Select, I'm going to use the square bracket button on the keyboard to enlarge the size of the Quick Select. And the Quick Select works just by making sure you're on the appropriate layer and sort of using it like a paintbrush, as though you're painting in the things you want to keep. You don't have to be too precise in this particular case, because there's a lot of common elements from photo to photo. If the window doesn't show through to show this part of the computer, that's okay. It matches up with everything behind it. So I could get a little bit sloppy there and it's just spilling over. So there's my selection. And the beautiful thing about this is to use the layer mask. It's a button that activates it down at the bottom. It attaches a layer mask to it. The layer mask thumbnail shows white where those pixels will be opaque, and black where it'll be transparent and show a window through to the next picture behind. So it's done just like that. There's the first person that pops into place, and he blends in really well with that background picture. Now I'll do it for the rest of these layers, just one at a time. I'll work my way through it. Paint the next guy. Now if I notice that I'm going too far or not going far enough, I can go and fix that. So for instance, if I zoom in really carefully on his ear here, I can see I've cut off a little bit of his ear. I can add to that by, use the square bracket to shrink down the Quick Select, and I'll just catch his ear like that. There might be somebody popping out from behind them, so I want to make sure it's a relatively good selection. Double click the hand tool to take it back to full view there. And yep, I can see I've grabbed more than I need, but that's just fine. I'm going to go ahead and hit the quick mask, and I can always go back. The beautiful thing about a layer mask is I can go back and I can edit this later to refine it, make it look a little bit better. Next layer, it's critical that I click on the layer before I use the quick select and get this next guy. I'm using a smaller brush, and that seems to be working pretty well. Good. I want to make sure he's completely in there. Layer mask, onto the next guy, click the layer first, paint him, looks good. Layer mask. And I'm on the final layer right now, and you can click these things to see what it is that you need to get. So if I turn this thing off, oh yeah, so it's this guy here that I have to collect next, and I do have to get him. Just like that. Get a little bit of his shirt there too. Layer mask, and that shows everybody through. So that's all the way through from beginning to end. That gets us the characters that we need, and you can do a quick check and make sure that we're not missing any chunks of them anywhere along. Nope, that looks good. And thanks, Steve, for participating in this. He was my model for this particular exercise. The other things that we were doing with this particular piece is to turn it into a piece of artwork. We're going to again use some layer masks and play around. So I found some stock art of a computer board, and it still has watermarks. Now when I dragged it in there, it put it on whatever layer was currently being held, so I better drag this to the top of this. Can't do it. Gotta size it first, so I'll put it up there. And if when you're enlarging or reducing the size of these things, you want to keep the proportions accurately, hold the Shift key as you stretch it so it goes top to bottom. And double click it to lock in the size. And now I can drag this and move it to the top of the stack. So there's my foreground object in front of all this stuff. And I'm going to use a quick mask again and another tool to try to turn this into a little piece of artwork. So what I would like to do is, instead of using the quick select, I'm going to use something under the lasso tool called the polygonal lasso tool. And this will allow me to click 4 points and to build a triangle selection out of this. And I've got the triangle selection now. And now I can turn this into a layer mask, same way I did before. It's just a selection. I'll click that button. Notice in the thumbnail you can see what's going on with the attached layer mask. The white part is solid, the black part is transparent. Now I want to refine this even more to make this look a little more artistic, and here's one of the nicest ways to do that. I am going to edit the mask, not the original image, but the mask, so I'm selecting it. And I'm going to blur this edge a little bit so it sort of gradiates from one thing to another. And I can do that by going up to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. It's the best blur. And there's no selection. If there was any selection in place still, I would have to deselect it. But now if I grab this thing and I really blur it out, I'm talking going all the way to like over 100. I can get some really nice effects with this. Well, maybe not over 100. I'm looking at this thinking, 81 actually looks pretty good. I'm going to sort of solidify it around there, around 80 or so. Say OK, and I've got the start to this artwork. Now, if you want to see what the layer mask looks like, hold down the Alt key and click on it, and you can actually see where that white part is. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually have a little border around this thing of the circuit board as well. So I'm going to go use just an ordinary paintbrush. There it is. And I'm going to use a white color, and I'm going to choose a brush that's nice and big. Even bigger than that. Even bigger than that. And I want it to be nice and feathered as well, so something like this. Now if I paint here, I can make that border. This is not going to look good. I'll Alt-click this, and you can see, it's a little bit too much. So I'll undo. Now I can paint this while I'm viewing it in this mode. I'm going to change the flow of this thing and the opacity. I'm going to dull it way down so that when I paint this thing, and if I hold the Shift key I can get a nice straight line too, I can just sort of paint over a couple of strokes, even a little bit outside, a little bit of that circuit board look. So it shows through. There, that's kind of doing the job. And then a couple more layers on top. Let's see, I wanted to add a vignette, so I'm going to go to a layer above. This is going to be pretty easy. I'm just going to fill this up with black. By holding down the Alt key and tapping Delete key twice, I can fill up this entire layer. And I'm going to call it Vignette. I can fill it up with black, and a vignette is actually pretty easy to make. I'm just going to punch a hole in it by dragging a rectangle inside, hitting Delete so I can see through it, deselecting, Control D will deselect for me, And now if I just blur this thing the way I did before, in fact, I can just repeat that Gaussian blur. I can get myself a vignette that easily. Now the next thing I want to do is just to try to play around with how this is looking. The vignette right now is really dark around the outside edges, but the beautiful thing about layers is you can non-destructively change how intense they are. So I'm just going to darken that a little bit, about 60% or so I get a little bit of a vignette. And by the same token, there's another thing I can do, that circuit board look. Right now it's a normal blend mode. And I've found that if you click on this and hit the down arrow, you can cycle it through all sorts of different variations. For instance, this is dissolve. This is darker. And if you scan through a few of these, you might find something that you like a little bit better. I'm going to try, I like a hard light. But again, hard light in conjunction with opacity, so it's not too severe or harsh, kind of gives it a nice look. Subtly different from the normal blend mode. Okay, 2 more layers to make. I would like to now put on a text layer, so I'll click the text tool. I'll choose a white color, and I'm just going to put in a label, TGJ2O. And this is looking really, really small, so let's take it all the way up to at least 72. That'll do. And on the end of that, let's see, I'm going to put Communications Technology, and I'll take the font size down. Done like this, and wow, I really guessed well at what font size to use. I wanted to get sort of a full justification, and it worked. Oops, but I misspelt it. 2 M's in Communications. And now it's a little bit too big. So here's a way that you can adjust the font size. Hold down Control, Shift, and then use greater than and less than to enlarge or shrink the size of the font. This is when it's selected. So if I just kind of tap it around like this, I can see I want to have something just a little bit less than 14 points. And you know what, you can actually go up here to the font size, and I can type in 13.5 and get something that's pretty close for full justification. And then I'll just move this object where I want it to go, maybe something around there. Now this is a little difficult to read because of the contrast behind there, so I'm going to add 1 more layer. Let's see, under the text, on top of the vignette, add another layer, and I'm going to add a gradient. Here's the gradient tool, and specifically the gradient I want to use is going to be from foreground color to transparent, and I'm just going to click at the bottom in that layer and drag straight up. I'll hold the Shift key to make it perfectly straight so that I fill that up with sort of a hazy dark box. And again, with that layer, I can adjust it later on. If I don't want it to be quite that intense, I can just take it a little bit back so it's a little easier to read. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all the way through it. How you take a bunch of pictures and you use layer masks to try to make them look like they're a piece of art. I hope that helped. Give it a try for yourself. That's it for now.